If you can, oops, okay. Hello? Should I try again? All right. Switch.
Check 1, 2. One second.
Okay. Shows that it's on. So was this going to be a big deal?
No, actually, I was going to be
Right, before I start this session, I want a show of hands. How many people follow stocks, the stock exchange? Okay, so I don't think anyone's going to be surprised that Luke Hayden with Citigroup is not with us today. In fact, Citigroup is, we're still, hanging on by a thread. But we are very, very fortunate today. We wanted the business perspective and how the economy, and again, as we said, when we decided to do a program on the global economy, it was a year ago, and we had no idea how relevant this would be. And certainly, major players in that is the corporate world, and we wanted that perspective as well. And I think that we've had a lot of interesting perspectives and what the current crisis means to the world. So in Luke Hayden's absence, I think we actually gained. And that's nothing personal about Luke Hayden. It's just that the speaker we do have is going to be able to speak on a much broader level. John Castellani, and we're so grateful that he was willing. We learned yesterday that Mr. Hayden wouldn't be with us, so fortunately his schedule, and he was willing to join us today. We want to thank him. He's president of the Business Roundtable, which is an association of chief executive officers of leading U.S. corporations with a combined workforce of nearly 10 million employees. I don't know if that's going to be adjusted today or not. And $5 trillion in annual revenues. Business Roundtable has been cited by the Financial Times as the most influential chief executive lobbying group in the United States. It's at the forefront of public policy debates, advocating for a vigorous, dynamic global economy. They give more than $7 billion a year in charitable contributions, accounting for nearly 60% of all the corporate given, and are technology and innovation leaders with more than $70 billion in annual research and development spending, more than a third of the total private research and development spending in the United States. That's obviously not the Business Roundtable itself, but its members. Prior to becoming president of the Business Roundtable, John was executive vice president of Tenneco, Inc. He is frequently called on by the news media to comment on business and public policy issues, and has appeared on such programs as Meet the Press, PBS, The News Hour with Jim Lehrer, Fox News Special Report, and CNBC's Street Signs. He regularly provides testimony before Congress on issues of key concern to Business Roundtable and has discussed the Roundtable's agenda for economic growth. And I think that we'll all look forward to this session. We hear a lot in the media, but I think this is really going to give us an in-depth overview of corporate America and the current global crisis. So welcome, John.
Thank you. It is indeed a pleasure, last minute or not, to be here in front of this very prestigious group, and particularly to be with the students from the University of Chicago Lab School who are explaining to me how they're not going to be scientists and engineers, but rather they want to be political scientists and economists. So we're going to have to work on that, ladies and gentlemen, before we do this. The mission of the World Affairs Council has probably never been more important than it is right now in the middle of what is a devastating global economic crisis. Still, I'm very happy to be here, even though it's a little intimidating. My task this afternoon is to say something insightful about the crisis after you've heard from an array of such world-class people as experts in journalism, the diplomatic corps, governments, think tanks, and civil society. I could have asked for a sunnier topic for my remarks, something a little more uplifting than how corporations are dealing with the current economic meltdown. But John F. Kennedy once said, "The American by nature is optimistic." And I think you'll see by the time I finish my remarks, that he's right. At least he's right by me. I have to start, however, by talking about these difficulties. And indeed, difficulties is, of course, far too mild a word for what we're experiencing right now in every one of the countries that is represented in this room and in the United States. As Barbara said, I'm speaking in my capacity as president of the Business Roundtable. We are, as she said, an association of chief executive officers. We've been working for job creation and economic growth for more than 35 years. But today we're facing the most difficult challenges for growth that we have ever confronted, by far. In fact, we're mired in the most perilous economic crisis the world has faced in my lifetime, and I dare say in the lifetime of everyone in this room. It's a time of chilling fear about our economic present, and it's deep anxiety about our economic future. Now, what had began as a small and local economic setback in the spring of 2008 expanded over the course of the summer and fall as the crisis in the financial markets took an ever-widening toll on the U.S. economy. The two major drivers of our economy, consumer spending and trade, collapsed, one after the other. I won't spend much time talking about the grim details of the crisis. I bet you've all scanned the newspapers, watched TV, listened to the radio, or turned on your computer this morning, so you know the numbers. But I'll only note that just this week, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke sharply downgraded the Fed's outlook for the America's economy, and he also forecast unemployment near 9% by the end of the year. And the news is similar for most parts of the world. I know you've already heard a great deal of discussion about the causes of the meltdown. In my view, the most important factors were first, an unrelenting focus in the financial sector, indeed across all of corporate America, on short-term profits and gains. Secondly, brilliant people who should have known better ignored that statement you'll find on almost every prospectus. Current results are no guarantee for future performance. Far too many people assume that the values of securities, of homes, and other assets would always go up. Having said that, I want to also say that I think it's unfair and illogical to look at the current situation in reverse. That is, to seek to find specific individuals or private or public organizations and blame them for what happened. You know, Warren Buffett had it right when he said, in the business world, the rearview mirror is always clearer than the windshield. But most importantly, playing the blame game and searching out scapegoats doesn't get us on the path to recovery and growth. So let's turn to the question at hand and how corporate America is dealing with the crisis. Let me put it in perspective. Business Roundtable's CEO Economic Outlook Index is our survey of what CEOs expect for sales, for capital expenditures, and employment figures for the next 6 months. In our latest survey, fourth quarter of 2008, it contracted to 16.5, a breathtaking drop from just the quarter before of 79, the lowest in our history. And just so you understand, our quarterly survey is a composite diffusion index that's centered on 50. Everything above 50 means the economy is expanding. Everything below 50, the economy is contracting. Again, 16.5 from 79, the lowest it's ever been, the fastest it's ever dropped. And those numbers reflect the fact that across America, corporations are doing what they have to do to protect their stockholders. And unfortunately, that means cuts. Cuts in jobs, cuts in investments, cuts in capital expenditures. But believe me, it's not what our CEOs would choose to do if there were any other realistic alternative. As CEOs, we know that the terrible toll joblessness takes on families. We also know how scared our workers are. They're worried about their families and whether or not they're going to be able to pay their mortgages, how they're going to pay for their health care and their health insurance and energy bills, whether or not they're going to be able to send their children to school, and whether or not they're going to have the security that they had planned for in their retirement. But unfortunately, we are confronted by some very stubborn facts. Demand for our products and services has dried up. Consumer demand, which has been the engine of economic growth for several years here in the United States, has been deflated by job losses, plummeting confidence, and vanishing credit. In fact, it's hard to overestimate the devastating effect that the credit crunch is having on our consumers, our suppliers, and our companies themselves. But let me give you just one telling example. Every year, the car rental companies, which you can all name, the big car rental companies, buy 1.5 million brand new American cars. Every year, they buy 1.5 million new American cars. This year, they can't. And they can't because they can't get the financing that they need to purchase those vehicles. In short, corporate America is locked in a classic vicious cycle. The credit collapse prevents consumers from buying. The lack of sales leads to cutbacks in jobs, and which further depresses spending and confidence. So what's the nation doing? My focus today is going to be on how corporate America is dealing with these problems. However, I want to say that if the events of the last 6 months have proved anything, it is that this is a crisis that business cannot solve alone, nor can government nor civil society all by themselves. All sectors have to work together. Our government is certainly trying to do its part. Legislation passed last year under a Republican president and a Democratic Congress injected $700 billion into the financial sector and to the automotive sector through the so-called Troubled Assets Relief Program. Now be sure, TARP proved to be very controversial, and this Congress and the new administration have made some mid-course corrections to the TARP program. Our central bank, the Federal Reserve, has reduced interest rates to historic lows. It's working to improve liquidity by taking over the issuing of high-end commercial paper. It has become the backer of corporate debt. However, I should note that it is only supporting commercial paper for the most highly rated, very successful companies. It is still very difficult for companies who do not fall into that relatively small category to get the credit that they need. Now, what about the just-passed stimulus package? I'm not even going to try to recap the debate, but I will say a little about some aspects of the plan, aspects that we at the Business Roundtable believe will either create jobs in the short term or make the kind of transformational and changes that will equip our economy for 21st century growth. Let me start with one example. For more than 5 years now, the Business Roundtable has been working to transform healthcare through the introduction of information technology into the healthcare system. Our companies provide health insurance for more than 35 million Americans, and we know that health IT will not only improve efficiency and outcomes, but it will generate an estimated $165 billion a year in healthcare savings when it's fully implemented. I'm happy to report that the stimulus package includes $19 billion to promote the use of information technology among healthcare providers, suppliers, and health plans. The final package also helped to meet some of our energy challenges. It includes $4.5 billion to modernize the electrical grid and expands the federal financial commitment to state and local government energy efficiency programs. The bill, the law, also expands and extends tax incentives for investments in energy efficiency and renewable energy while supporting research into promising new transportation vehicle technologies. The legislation includes $6 billion in physical science and engineering research, in research infrastructure, and math and science education. And that money, my friends from the lab school, that money will help build the U.S. innovation capacity, and better prepare U.S. students for the 21st century. Business Roundtable has long believed that we need a 21st century workforce to ensure sustained growth. We strongly back the package's $2.9 billion in investment that provides for states to expand their training and employment services. That investment and the others will help upgrade the skills of American workers and prepare them for careers in high-demand occupations. Now, the legislation also includes significant middle-class tax relief, as well as some business tax incentives to enhance liquidity, promote investment, and provide for future economic growth. Now, to be sure and to be honest, there are many things in the bill that I believe will make it less difficult for us to recover. For example, we were disappointed that the final compromise bill failed to boost the housing market or better incentivize business investment. I'll say more about those issues in a moment when I discuss what corporations and we as a nation believe we need to do next. But for now, I want to just note one telling statistic that Barbara hinted at. The stimulus package, which is the largest thing Congress has ever passed other than the annual budget, will pump almost $800 billion into the economy. And that's a huge number. But keep in mind, in the Business Roundtable's 160 member companies, just by ourselves, we generate more than $5 trillion in revenue every year. Clearly, and we're only one part of the business segment, clearly government by itself cannot get our economy moving again. You know, there's another aspect of how corporations are dealing with a global crisis that's particularly important to this audience. Business Roundtable has always been strongly committed to growth through international trade, and we've worked extremely hard to make the case for trade to our political leaders and to the American people. And the facts are clearly on our side. 1 out of every 5 jobs in the United States relies on the fact that there are consumers overseas waiting to buy American goods and services. Our members know very well that 95% of the world's consumers live outside of the United States. And according to one estimate, trade liberalization itself generates between $800 billion and $1.5 trillion per year in added U.S. output. But to be equally frank, it's not been easy to win over public opinion. A few years ago, not so many years ago, a survey revealed that 57% of polled Americans believe that freer trade destroys more American jobs than it creates. And to make it worse, healthy majorities of the American people believe that trade primarily benefits multinational corporations at the expense of small businesses. And these were the popular attitudes before the crisis that's before us hit us. I would very much hate to look at what those polls look like now. Today, so many Americans are linking much of their concern about job losses to trade. Political leaders and the public seem to think that the way to restore economic security is to protect America first, walling us off from the international economy. That attitude leads to dangerous measures like the Buy American provisions that were included in the stimulus package. Now, thankfully, they were watered down somewhat. But it also makes it very difficult to enact the kinds of measures that we need to get the economy moving. Trade agreements that spur demand for American goods and services and make foreign goods affordable for American consumers. Small statistic to put in your head. There are 130 free trade agreements in the world. The United States is part of 12. So the rest of the world gets it. We still have our head in the sand. Up to now, I know I've been spreading a lot of gloom and doom, but there is hope. And I do believe that there is opportunity if we take the right steps going forward. You know, that great American philosopher, Yogi Berra, once said that if you don't know where you're going, you'll wind up somewhere else. And when it comes to this historic economic crisis, it's very hard to know where we should go. An opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal recently pointed out that after decades of diligent research, scholars are still arguing about what caused the Great Depression. Nor do we know how we got out of it. Some people credit the New Deal, while others still say that FDR's policies prolonged the Depression. So it's no wonder that smart, well-informed people disagree about what to do about this unprecedented challenge. Business Roundtable believes that we must enact some measures in the near term and make some more basic changes in the longer term to return the country to prosperity. In the near term, we believe the administration must do even more to help the housing market. After all, the collapse of that market in the gigantic but rickety structure of securities that were built on top of it started the economy into its tailspin. And what President Obama announced this week was a very good start, but from the Business Roundtable's perspective, we still believe that the way to get people back into the housing market is to lower mortgage interest rates even further, down to about 4.25%, 4.5%, where they should be given the Fed's monetary policy at this time. In addition, the crisis has made crystal clear that our financial markets have outstripped the ability of our regulatory bodies to ensure transparency and guarantee that risks and safety are properly balanced. We need a comprehensive review and an overhaul of our regulation system that affects our financial sector as well as those of us who are issuers of stock. Now, I'm going to address the very dangerous, and of course the one that points at me, gets pointed at me all the time, topic, executive compensation. Executive compensation has certainly gotten out of whack, at least with some of the firms that have been in the headlines. Business Roundtable has long urged that executive pay should be directly tied to the performance. Executives that earn money for their stockholders should be rewarded. Those responsible for outlandish risks and losses should definitely not be. But at the same time, in creating a new regulatory framework and in changing executive compensation, we should remember something that the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, and that is that good laws lead to making better ones, but bad ones bring about worse. We want to avoid moving beyond fixing what is wrong to changing what is right. The current economic crisis has already led to a huge intrusion of government into the private sector, pushing legislators and bureaucrats towards boardrooms and onto executive teams. Just about the worst so-called reform that I could think of would be to add 535 members of Congress and the President of the United States to a corporate board of directors. Government officials are by their very nature risk-averse. They're loath to make the decisions that may offend one constituency or another. But this economy will only be turned around by managers and boards that are willing to take prudent risks that are necessary to create new industries, promote new technologies, and add new jobs. Similarly, it's a mistake for government to take on executive compensation. Ironically, as one of my favorite foes of executive compensation, Professor Lucian Babchuk up at the Harvard Business School just recently noted in the Wall Street Journal, the legal limits that have been imposed on compensation have exactly the wrong effect. They separate compensation from performance. Independent boards of directors representing the interests of shareholders should restore the link between how an executive performs and what he or she earns. Now, I began by saying that I'm one of those Americans President Kennedy talked about who's by nature an optimist. I can even see some silver linings in this brutal economy. I doubt many people would look on credit-based spending as an economic panacea. The need for more Americans to save more money has been brought home as never before. And that's good news for future productive investments. Moreover, America has started to make the kinds of transformational investments that our members have been urging for years in education and workforce training programs, in tax relief for workers and consumers, in health care reform, in diversifying our energy resources, and in stimulating business investment. In addition, this crisis proves once and for all that ours is a globally integrated economy. And I believe that when that realization sets in, political leaders will see that we need globally integrated solutions. I was very happy to see that at yesterday's meeting between President Obama and Prime Minister Harper in Ottawa, both leaders agreed that as economies around the world face crisis, it's important for those economies and for the United States and others to resist calls for protectionism. Still, I have to say my optimism has its limits. This crisis won't end quickly. It won't work itself out. We won't recover, and we certainly won't move from recovery to growth by just muddling through. We don't just need transformational investments. We need transformational leaders in government, in labor, in business. Jim Wallace, who's the editor of the evangelical magazine Sojourners, points out that the real practitioners of social change, people like Dr. Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi, understood something that was very important. They knew that you don't change a society merely by replacing one leader who puts his fingers up to see which way the wind is blowing with another. Instead, he said, you change society by changing the wind. Change the wind, transform the debate, recast the discussion, alter the context in which political decisions are being made, and you will change the outcomes. That's the kind of leadership that I think we need from every corner of society. And I think we're going to get it. But then again, I'm an American. I'm an optimist. Thank you. Questions or? I'd be happy to answer questions. Anything, you can't offend me unless you talk about my mother, who raised 8 children and she was only 5 feet tall. So she's vicious. Yes, sir.
Yes, good afternoon.
Son of.
Can you hear me okay? Nope.
It's the universal practice of all of these kinds of meetings. Is this on? Okay. If you yell out, I still, even at my age, I can hear it. Good question. The question was, just take executive compensation, executive pay. What is the mechanism to make it happen? And I presume by the question, what's the mechanism to make it happen so it's right? We have spent a lot of time studying this. We fund something called the Business Roundtable Institute for Corporate Ethics down at the Darden School, but there are 70 business schools that participate in it. And we believe that from the standpoint of matching pay to performance, there are a number of things that you have to do and boards of directors have to do. And I would make the case that the preponderance of boards do this. Unfortunately, there's some that just get it wrong, and we read about the some, and that drives all the rest of it. First and foremost, compensation has to be tied to performance, but not performance over a short period of time. Remember, I said if I look at what was at the root of a lot of the economic crisis that we're currently facing, it was this unrelenting demand for short-term gains, short-term profits, such that we created systems of income and instruments of income that not only were so far away from underlying assets you couldn't see them with a Hubble telescope, but they were based on very, very short-term transactions. So that compensation has to be based on long-term value creation for shareholders, first and foremost. Secondly, it has to be balanced. It cannot rely on one instrument or another instrument too highly. That is, it can't be too much in stock options, too much in cash, too much in restricted stock. It has to be balanced so you get the right behaviors from the executives that you want. Third, that it should be absolutely transparent, that every shareholder of the company, everybody in the public should know how much is at risk, how much is made if the company succeeds, and how much is lost if the company fails. And fourth, that it should be determined by a compensation committee that's made up of independent directors, which they all are now, independent directors of boards of directors. The comp committee is fully independent, and that should set the salary. Executives should not set their own salary. But even if you get it all right, there is another overlying principle that needs to be applied, and that is you cannot reward failure. You cannot walk away after shareholders have lost money, employees have lost jobs, customers have lost high-quality products and services. You cannot reward failure. We do not always get that right, and when we get it wrong, it causes the kinds of distortions we're seeing right now because everybody hates pay for failure. So I'm going to go to the young man in the back, and then we'll come back to the front. Does your mic work?
I think so. Yeah. Okay.
Great.
As a lobby group, you say not to play the blame game, but Business Roundtable represents many of the companies that are actually to blame. Among them, Bear Stearns or Lehman Brothers or Morgan Stanley. Alone among the banks that were responsible is Goldman Sachs. Mm-hmm. So why should the taxpayer unconditionally rescue them? How do we make the SEC into an actually viable regulatory agency?
Sure. It's a good question. If you didn't hear the question, the Roundtable represents some of the companies that young man says were responsible for the credit crisis. And here, why should we inject taxpayer money into them, and why should we, how do we hold them accountable, and how do we make the SEC more accountable? It's a very good question, and there are a lot of different answers, but let me focus on a couple of the points that you made. First and foremost, no company gets up every morning, or very few that I know, with some very famous exceptions right now, and says, how do we screw our employees, our shareholders, and the public? They're there to make money for the shareholders. They understand that. The pressure to make money for the shareholders is unrelenting, and particularly I want to go back to the short term. A couple of statistics that drive that short-term focus. The average holding period of a shareholder of a Business Roundtable company is 7.5 months. The average tenure of a CEO of a Business Roundtable company, remember the largest companies in America, is 4.2 years. A third of our members have been on the job less than 2 years, and a third of them come from outside the organization that they currently lead. Those things have come about from an unrelenting pressure by our investors to have the stock price, and it's all measured in stock price, go up day in, day out, quarter in, quarter out. And think about this, Harvard Business School study. A company that misses first call, a company misses expectation of what the street is expecting in earnings for a quarter will face a 15 to 25% drop in their market cap if they miss by 2 cents. That's what it takes. And interestingly enough, it isn't 2 cents. You were going to make 35 and you made 33. Same effect as if you were going to lose 18 and you lost 20 cents a share. So at the heart of it, it's the old pogoism. If you're not old enough to know pogo, who are these evil people that are forcing this kind of behavior and this short-term focus? Well, guess what, folks? It's us. Because while Americans view themselves as long-term investors because they take a portion of their compensation, their salary, their savings every month and put it into the Fidelity Wahoo Fund. And they do that month in and month out, and they never vary from it because they think they're long-term investors. The Fidelity Wahoo Fund and all of the Wahoo funds, all the funds, are just share renters. They're in and out. They come in, they want a fast 5%, they're gone. And if you don't give them a fast 5%, they're unrelenting in their punishment because they sell and break dishes very quickly. So that has unfortunately forced management to think more and more creative about how you can make short-term profits at the expense of long-term sustained growth. And that is what I think is really the heart of it. Should taxpayer money be used to bail out those people who failed? No, absolutely not. If you're willing to withstand a long period of time before the financial markets work again. So theoretically, ideologically, we would not have argued that taxpayer money go into the financial sector. But the political calculus, which I think was a correct one, was that the consequences of allowing our financial system and the global financial system to fail were much greater than using the taxpayer money to pull it back from the edge. That's a political decision. It's not an ideological decision. I happen to think it was the right decision, but it's an ugly decision because it puts us down a path where, as I said, we now have the government as our partner, and governments don't take risk. So it was wrong. And if you don't like it, there are only 80% of the American people that stand with you. They hate it. 58% hate the auto company bailout. If it didn't occur, the calculus was, and I think correctly, that the recession would be longer, deeper, and in fact could have led to a global economic collapse. That's the decision that people, that leaders have to make. Those are the decisions that the Congress and the President make. Yes, sir.
May I ask a point of clarification?
Yes, sir.
And then another sub-question.
You're not limited to one question.
Okay. Well, I just want to clarify now. You mentioned that usually the car rental companies buy 1.5 million cars. Now, did I understand you say that this year they didn't buy any?
They haven't bought any yet because they can't get financing.
Okay,
Just a longer explanation if you're a wonk. Hertz, Avis Budget, Enterprise, they don't go out and find their own financing for the purchase of their fleets. They go to a bank. And it's an asset-backed debt instrument. So in the past, up until last fall, purchasers of debt loved it because it came with a high rating, A1, P1 paper, for those of you who know the Standard & Poor Moody's ratings. It was backed by a monoline insurance company, so it was absolutely insured. And boom, they went out, bought the cars, helped Detroit every year. They're predominantly American cars that they buy. With the liquidity crisis in the banks and the credit crisis in the banks, they now have gone to the banks and said, gee, we'd like this again. Banks turn to the insurance companies. They say, we're not going to insurance. The banks say, we can't do it without insurance, and therefore you're on your own, and they can't go out in the market because they've never been there, so they don't buy it.
what can we do about that, if anything?
We have to find, well, it's not the, it's the bank, it's the insurance companies. The TARP program and the commercial, what's called the commercial paper program at the Federal Reserve, focused on people who were in the debt markets and had AA rated debt. What we have got to do is find a way to extend those guarantees so that people who have high quality debt can still have those instruments insured. And that's something that you'll see in TARP 2. And there is just when you thought it was safe to go back in the waters, young man, there will be a TARP 2. Yes, in the back.
Rafi Khan from the UFC Lab Schools.
Yeah.
You pointed out that we need to keep our government figures. How is there a way to keep the balance the other way around, where we keep our corporate leaders out of the government so we don't excessively influence the public policy? And
Okay.
like lobbyism is a big issue in the country.
How many people think that corporations have undue influence over governments? Good. How many people think labor unions have undue influence over governments? Good. How many people think teachers have undue influence over government? Good. How many people think doctors have undue influence over government? Good. Okay. How many people think, how many people are members of Do What's Right for America? The general interest, not the special interest, the general interest. Golly, there isn't any. The way whether you like it or not, and I don't like it from this standpoint, everybody likes to blame the special interest. But in fact, in 30 years of being in and out of Washington, I have never met the general interest. In fact, what we do and what lobbyists do for the government is they provide information that no member of Congress or not all member of Congress should have. And it's the perspective of the firefighters. It's the perspective of the Teamsters, of the teachers, of the business community, of the big business community and the small business community. And what we elect our members of Congress to do is figure out of all of those special interests, what is the best thing to do to move the country forward. So while we love to blame special interests, and we love to blame lobbyists for getting everything that they want, the fact is, I have never voted on a piece of legislation on the floor of the Congress. I have never signed anything in the bill. Larry has. Any bill into law. My colleague, Larry Burton, who's our executive director. But that's what Congress is supposed to balance on your behalf. It's great and it's easy to blame lobbyists, and we had a wonderful time blaming lobbyists during this last presidential election. And by the way, it was an equal opportunity election for blaming lobbyists, because both Senator McCain and now President Obama were just as hard on lobbyists. But in fact, if you remove practical experience, whether it's the firefighter, the teacher, or the business person, from input to the United States Congress or input to your state capital or to your mayor, the folks you elect have no idea how this is going to affect those very important parts of the society and the economy. So you don't like it. Everybody likes to blame us. When I took this job, my mother was still alive. She wrote me a note saying, where did I go wrong? But they perform a very important function for the country. Yes, sir.
Brian Davies, Alaska World Affairs Council.
I'm sorry.
Brian Davies, Alaska World Affairs
Oh,
Council.
yeah, sure, Brian. I'm sorry. We just met. Yeah.
Looking for silver linings as optimists, do you think that the collapse of the, shall we say, overly creative financial practices will cause people to, instead of going into that area, go into more creative areas, such as engineering? And how can we, it's a plant for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's, how can we help that to happen? Because clearly we're way behind other countries in that area.
We are. It's a good question, particularly for the future, and that's what I focused on in my remarks. If you ask our members, what's the biggest single shortage you face in the future to be successful as a company, they say scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians, people with analytical skills. Because those are the people that we used to get from China and India that we can't anymore. Those are the people who are not being produced in numbers, sufficient numbers from our own colleges and universities. And those are the people that are going to help us in the future own the high end of the value-added chain. The future in America and the future for American workers is we have to design it. We have to be the innovative leaders here in the United States. We have to be the people who figure out how to sell it, how to market it, how to service it around the world. We have to be the smartest people in designing the next best whatever in this country. And where we used to get those scientists and engineers from other countries, they now can either not get here because of post-9/11 visa restrictions, or increasingly they can find a darn good job in India and China, and they don't have to schlep 15,000 miles to work 15,000 miles away from their home. Here's the problem we have. To prove the point, and I proved it to my wife. My wife hired me, by the way, for my first job, which was as a research scientist, before she was my wife, I should point out. So that's two mistakes she's made in the last 36 years. We actually demonstrated our stupidity as men at the Business Roundtable, me, by spending $250,000 to have a prestigious university come up with the surprising calculation and projection that 60% of all graduates from college and universities for the foreseeable future will be women. So as my wife said, you spent $250,000 to learn that women are smarter than men. It proves the point. Yet only 6% of the women in this country go into engineering and sciences. And the predominant field for those who go into sciences is into medicine, and that is a very, very important field, such that half of all the students in our medical schools are now women. But we have to convince women, we have to convince men, we have to convince students that the best future is in just exactly what you said, Brian. It's designing, it's the analytical skills, it is figuring out smarter ways to manufacture and deliver, it's owning the high end of the value-added chain. I'll give you a depressing thought. Every year, I spend time at business schools. I have a good friend that has me come up to Tuck at Dartmouth every year. Last year, I sat down with the second-year students, asked them at lunch where everybody's going to work. Everybody was going to an investment bank or a consulting firm. One young lady going to work for Kellogg, one young man going to work for General Motors. That's it. Those jobs aren't there anymore in those investment banks, in the financial sector. It is my hope that we can convince as business leaders those young men and women to come to corporate America, because we're going to need them to compete. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
How did our best and our brightest permit legislation to be passed where the banks could take their capital and lever it up 40 times legally? And having done that, how do we unwind that leverage?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, as I said, if you want to look back and find people to blame, there are lots of people to blame. There were a lot of different competing agenda here. All of which had great legitimacy. One of which was more people should own homes. Homes should be more affordable. That helped. The other of which is there should be more capital available for investment, no matter where you find it. The other of which was there ought to be more avenues for accumulating wealth that didn't necessarily have to take a long period of time in research and development, investment, and production. So what we didn't make the deliberate decision to load up on derivative instruments that people can hardly explain. We made decisions on housing. We made decisions on capital availability. We made decisions on efficiency. But nobody stepped back and added them all up and said, what have we ended up here? And we didn't have a regulatory structure that even understood it. I mean, one of the places where we need more economists is in our government and in our Congress. I've had a lot of fun trying to explain to people what a credit default swap is. Does anybody here know what a credit default swap is? There you go. You can explain it. The way I've said is, Barbara owns a car. I bought an insurance policy on Barbara's car, hoping she crashes and I get paid.
But they
how does
also,
that add to the system? Well, it allowed more money to be available for home mortgages.
Bill Donaldson spoke before the Foreign Policy Association meeting in New York a few months ago.
Sure.
And he talked about that there were synthetic credit default swaps, which were bets on bets. Sure. And the best and the brightest permitted this to happen. And on anyone's language, 40-to-1 leverage, which is 2.5% margin, is a no-no in anyone's book.
You're absolutely right. In hindsight, you're absolutely right. At the time it was occurring, assuming what I said, that asset valuations only go up, they don't go down, it was a great way to produce capital. We clearly had the ingenuity and the creativity of our financial sector outstrip both the regulatory process and, quite frankly, outstrip common sense. Yes, sir.
John, my name is Denman Zirkle, and I want to thank you for your positive and upbeat comments.
Thank you.
And I would also add your realistic comments. But I want to go back to this question of trust and confidence in the business community. And specifically, what the Business Council can do to encourage it and to foster it. My question is, during the past 2 years, have any of your members been, have they been found to have backdated stock options for their executives? And if so, could you identify 3 of them? And could you let us know what the Business Council did publicly in terms of comments or actions in regard to that kind of undisclosed, reprehensible behavior?
Sure. 3 good questions. First, it's the Business Roundtable. The Business Council looks just like us, except they don't advocate, and they have the retired CEOs in it. And there's always confusion. So, but the answer is none. 0. None backdated. I think they got that 2 or 3 years ago. In our principles of executive compensation, to which we hope all of our members adhere, backdating is absolutely prohibited. It lacks transparency. It changes the rules of the game. It changes the incentives. It should not be done. But I think there's a broader point here, and that is about how we swing too far in this country. When I was with Tenneco, we didn't have stock options in our company. We were criticized by a lot of Wall Street, by a lot of analysts, by a lot of investors, by not having stock options, because stock options were the way to reward people, to incentivize them to be aligned with shareholders. Okay. Small companies that don't have a lot of cash to pay talent use stock options, particularly in Silicon Valley, and building up the talent that they needed to be able to develop the products and services that they now have a very successful. Okay, that's fine. As long as it's transparent, as long as it's accounted for correctly, because remember, stock options were free. They didn't cost you anything on your balance sheet. That's fine, as long as you play by those rules and you don't change them. What backdating did was say that I, as a board, or I as an executive, can change the rules by which I'm being compensated and the rules that I disclosed to the investors when I created that form of compensation, and that's just plain wrong. And I think you've seen that stopped pretty completely across the corporate America, everywhere, across boards. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Dorian. I'm another student, and if it's okay with Sasha, I've
You want to go
got 2
into
questions.
engineering, sciences?
Well, actually, it's one of my questions. A lot of the reason I'm coming from a family that's been interested in the sciences, a lot of the problem is that in certain, engineering fields and certain physical fields, more physical sciences, there's a lot of discrimination against women, and so women aren't really looking to go into those fields because there is so much discrimination and it's very difficult for them. I was wondering what you had to say about that, and also there's a lot of concern that some of these rising scientists don't really have, there's not enough grant money around to allow them to keep moving up, and all the grant money that there is just going to the older professors that have already sort of proven themselves, and there's no, as you're saying with the government, there's no investment in risk.
You have proven the case again that women are smarter than men, because it took us about 3 or 4 years to figure that out. It took me 3 or 4 years to figure it out. There are a number of inhibitors to women going into the engineering and sciences. First and foremost, if you decide you want to be a scientist or an engineer and you go into those classes, you're sitting there as the only woman in the class. So you feel a little isolated. So the first thing we have to do is get more women to take those disciplines. Secondly, to be very candid about it, a lot of the engineering disciplines, particularly around the country, have been taught by professors who have come from countries that view women as property. We have to change that, and that is changing. Third, we have to find a way to eliminate the awful effect of the so-called weeding out disciplines. So you get to college, you decide, hey, I'd like to be an electrical engineer. We say, that's terrific. Take differential calculus first. And if you make it through it, we'll then start teaching you electrical engineering. Well, I don't know how many of you, when I got to indefinite integral equations, and I'm a biochemist by training, my professor said, well, look, I can't flunk you. You came here every day. But please don't take another one. This was somewhere in my junior year. We have to find ways to support all students, but particularly women, through those what's called the weeding out course. And lastly, we have to demonstrate that you will be successful, that you have a successful path. The Business Roundtable has 160 CEOs, the largest companies in America. 6 of those are women, even though the preponderance of the discipline of the CEOs who are in our companies is engineering and science. 6 are women. And if we don't change the practice about showing that, look, if you are, and I dare say those 6 are twice as smart as the men who they climbed over to get those jobs because they had to be. That's changing, but it's not changing fast enough. To support the research is something I talked about in the stimulus package. We lead something called the TAP Coalition, which is Tapping America's Potential. And it's 15 trade associations, all of whom have come to the same conclusion. My God, we're losing our competitive edge because we don't have enough scientists and engineers. And one of the reasons, among the reasons why we're losing our competitive edge, is that we were not funding basic research in the physical sciences. We fund basic research pretty substantially in the life sciences in this country because we all want to find the cure for cancer or HIV, AIDS, all that stuff. But guess what's happened? The life scientists have outstripped the physical scientists, so you don't have the people that can develop the devices to implement what the life sciences have developed. So we need more funding for research and development in the physical sciences. We need more funding for graduate students and for teachers. Only 30% of the teachers in high school across America who teach science and mathematics have their degree in science and mathematics. And if you don't have the support for the teachers at that level, you're not going to be successful. So you figured it out a lot quicker than we figured it out, but you're going to have to change all of those things so you are comfortable, you are encouraged, and you think you're going to succeed because there are role models for you. Yes, ma'am.
Just kind of a follow-up question to the previous question. So do you think this lack of awareness or education on the part of the average American has contributed to the crisis? And if it has, what should we do to fix it? Like, is this TAP organization going to work? And how exactly is China going to be ahead of America by the fact that they're going to have more engineers, more scientists? How is that going to...
Sure. Interestingly enough, I can't say if everybody in America had an engineering or a science degree, we would not have gone into this financial crisis. That isn't what caused it, quite frankly. But one of the problems we do have, and one of the deficiencies we have as a country, is financial education. Lab school students, anybody take just kind of home budgeting finance, basic finance in your high school?
We don't have that class.
Don't have that class.
We have economics. That's about it.
You have economics, great. Supply, demand. You know what compound interest is. You know how credit card interest is calculated. You know what the consequences of paying back your credit card by the minimum payment every month are. Do you know how mortgages are created? Do you know what the limit of your own personal income a mortgage should be? Don't know. We don't teach that. You kind of find it by, I watched my own children, who are now adults, find their way, blunder through it, even though I should have been teaching them. And you find it out the hard way. So it's not the lack of scientists and engineers that got us into this mess. It is a combination in part of all the other things we wanted to accomplish, but also the fundamental lack that we have across the country. I'm not saying the people in this room, but by and large across the society, of a lack of a good understanding of what personal finances are, how credit markets work, and what your role as an individual is in those credit markets. Yes, ma'am.
Building off of Dorian's earlier question, I've heard estimates that state that women earn 72 cents to every dollar earned by a man. What is an organization like Business Roundtable doing to address unfair business practices that discriminate against women, like unfair hiring practices or promotional? I don't know. So what is Business Roundtable doing to help me in the workplace?
Good question. All of the members of the Business Roundtable are the largest, most sophisticated companies in the country, in the world. They get it. They know that if they're not attracting good, smart women to the workplace, they're not going to be able to compete, quite frankly. They know that if they don't pay them fairly, they're not going to be able to compete, quite frankly. The smartest and best companies understand that if they don't have within their workforce at all levels, from the shop floor to the boardroom, good diversity, not just based on gender, but based on experience, based on where you came from, based on how you were raised and how you lived, then you're not going to understand your customer. And understanding our customers is the single most important thing that we do. When I was at Tenneco, we happened to own the Hefty brand and Easy Foil, right? Anybody use Hefty bags or Easy Foil turkey roasters? I wouldn't know how to roast a turkey if you put a gun to my head. They came, I had to spend my time learning how to make a full meal for a whole bunch of people using all the Easy Foil products. I did not have that diversity of experience. I would not have been as qualified to do what I did if I didn't have it. My idea of making a meal is you pick up the phone, you dial the Chinese carryout, and they deliver it. And I'm going to stick to that. But it is diversity of experience. You don't want companies where you can win the parlor game of 20 people around a table whispering a phrase in one ear to the next ear, and it comes back as the 20th person getting it exactly right. You want creative, different people from different backgrounds and different perspectives. Companies get that. They get the fact that if they're not paying competitively for women, they're not going to get the best and brightest in the country, and they do. This is the last question, young man. Is there anybody